Good day, students. How are you doing today? Today we are going to be taking a brief look at the topic respiratory system. Actually, it's divided into two. So I'm going to be taking the first part of the respiratory system. Now, we'll talk about the respiratory system. I want you to have an idea of what we want to talk about. It's actually not the cellular respiration we talked about. By now, no, I believe you know that already. We'll talk about the respiratory system. I'm talking about respiration by the respiratory system. What is respiration? Respiration, as you know, is one of the characteristics of living things. It is a lifelong sustaining process in which gases are exchanged between the body and the outside atmosphere. If you want to be specific, we are talking about how oxygen moves from the outside environment into the body, and then how water vapor and carbon dioxide and other waste gases move from the body to the outside environment or atmosphere. Now, respiration is carried out mainly by the respiratory system. At this point, I want you to know that respiration by the respiratory system is not the same as cellular respiration. Cellular respiration, of course, occurs or takes place inside the cell, which of course is the mitochondria and the cytoplasm, depending on the type. As you know, the anaerobic is for the cytoplasm, while the aerobic is for the mitochondria. It is quite different from respiration by respiratory system. Okay, we'll talk about respiration by respiratory system. We are actually talking about how oxygen or the oxygen needed by the cellular respiration is being supplied, and then how the carbon dioxide, which is expelled by the cellular respiration, is being expelled out of the body. So that is the structures or the features that are responsible for carrying out that duty. On this basis, if we want to say respiration as a whole, now we'll talk about four basic important forms or types. We'll look at it as one, breathing or ventilation. Then we'll look at external respiration, internal respiration, then of course cellular respiration. While ventilation is the process by which oxygen enters and carbon dioxide exits, respiration is the process by which oxygen and carbon dioxide diffuse in and out of the blood. Alright, talking about respiration now. Now that respiration, which of course is internal, external, and cellular. Respiration is also referred to as what? Gas exchange. So we hear the word gas exchange, we're talking about what? Respiration. And it occurs in two areas of the body. We have the external respiration, which refers to gas exchange across the respiratory membrane in the lungs, and then you have the internal respiration, which refers to gas exchange across the respiratory membrane in the metabolizing tissue, like your skeletal muscle, for example. And then finally, you have your cellular respiration, which occurs, of course, in the cells and produces energy for consumptions. Now, if you want to make it more clear, you can picture yourself as an oxygen molecule. Okay, the respiration process now. Picture yourself as an oxygen molecule. Assume you are going to school. School is your work right now. Okay, now you enter the body through the lungs. You travel through the body by the bloodstream, and then ultimately you enter what is cell. I've said three things now. First of all, what do? You enter the body via the lungs. 1. You travel through the body by the bloodstream. 2. And then ultimately you now enter into a cell to go do some work. 3. And then finally you are a hard worker. As such, you get dirty and become carbon dioxide. And then you finally go home from work. How do you go home? You have to leave the cell and travel through the lungs via the bloodstream, the same way you got to school. So that's just the process of the respiration we are talking about. Now, the respiratory system, of course, is specific organs and structure used for gas exchange, which of course is respiration, in both plants and animals. Okay, the respiratory system. By the respiratory system, actually, it involves two subsidiary processes with the respiratory system. Now, the first process is the ventilation, which is breathing, I've talked about, and then breathing, as you know, is a physical process of conducting air through and through the lungs. In terms of talking about we humans now and the other terrestrial animals. And then the other process is gas exchange, which is a biochemical process in which oxygen diffuses out of the air into the blood, while carbon dioxide and other waste gases diffuses out of the blood and into the air. The oxygen taken in is used to oxidize food, which releases carbon dioxide. We're talking about cellular respiration now. And then the carbon dioxide has to leave the cell before another oxygen can be taken into the cell. Alright, so this is your respiratory system. Let's look at breathing. We'll talk about breathing. We're talking about in many animals, breathing is done by the action of the lungs. Breathing is taking in air or taking air into the lungs and forcing the air out of your lungs. Okay. Breathing and respiration are related, but they are not the same. Okay, breathing is just like the starting process. Breathing is the action of air going into and out of your lungs, while respiration is using the oxygen in that air to release energy from the food that you eat. Almost all living things except some bacteria need oxygen to live. Fish takes in water through its mouth, just like you take in air through your mouth. The air passes over its gills and blood vessels in the gills, in the gill arches, and then through the filament, take up the oxygen and send it to the rest of the fish's body. And then the water passes out through the other side of the gills, which is called countercurrent, as we learn as we proceed. Alright, what you should learn that is that plants and animals also breathe. Even the plant, they breathe. Now the function of respiratory system is to take oxygen into the lungs and to get rid of water and carbon dioxide. Alright, it takes water into the lungs and then gets rid of carbon dioxide and water. You know, plant breathe as well, right? Plant do breathe in oxygen as well. You should know that. Okay, they give out carbon dioxide and absorb oxygen from the air that surrounds them. Their tissue respire just as animal tissue do. The only difference is that the part above the soil get their oxygen directly from their air through pores. Okay, that is the difference. The structure is the difference. The pores in the leaves are called the stomata. A singular word for stomata is the stoma. And then we have the lenticels in woody stems, and you know what the lenticels do. Woody stems do not have stomata. Okay, this is a leaf or having a stomata. You must note here that woody cells do not have stomata, so they use the lenticels for their breathing. Let's look at gaseous exchange now. When we talk of external respiration, which is the exchange of gases, we're talking about oxygen and carbon dioxide, between inhaled air you breathe in, and then your blood. This gaseous exchange is of course by diffusion. So gaseous exchange takes place by diffusion. You know diffusion? Diffusion, of course, is the movement of gaseous molecules, in this case from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration. That is diffusion. So we move oxygen from high concentration to low concentration, and we move carbon dioxide from high concentration to low concentration. In human and most terrestrial animals, lungs are the organ involved with breathing. They are the main organs that make up the respiratory system. Take a clear look at this diagram and watch the arrows. So we are having high concentration of oxygen in the atmosphere and low concentration of oxygen in the cell. Diffusion will occur, that is, oxygen will move from high concentration, which is the atmosphere, into the cell of low concentration. On the other hand, when we're having a high concentration of carbon dioxide in the cell, and then we're having low concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, carbon dioxide will diffuse from the cell to the atmosphere. Okay, this is how the gaseous entry occur, and this is the reason behind it. It is called diffusion gradient, okay, or concentration gradient in terms of diffusion. Now look at direct external respiration. We'll talk of direct external respiration. In direct external respiration, oxygen diffuses directly from the environment into the cell, and carbon dioxide diffuses out from the cell into the surrounding environment. In this system of respiration, no special respiratory system is required. Simple organisms that are smaller in size, such as your sponges, your jellyfish, your amoeba, your hydra, and then some terrestrial flatworms, use this primitive method, which is the direct respiration. Direct respiration occurs mostly in wet or water medium. So this kind of respiration occurs mostly in wet or water medium. All right, and you must know that these organisms are simple organisms. They just allow the oxygen to diffuse directly through different parts of their body cells. All right, and amoeba is the chief among these organisms that carries out this kind of respiration. Now, when we look at indirect respiration, in indirect respiration, oxygen diffuses from the environment into the body system of more complex organisms. These organisms have structures because the oxygen needed is of high demand, and therefore they need to develop a structure that will enable them utilize this oxygen or get this oxygen from the surrounding environment. Okay, the presence of this structure is due to the high demand of oxygen, which cannot be met by the set-down method above. These specialized structures are within the animal's body, as shown below. Okay, so when we talk of indirect respiration, we are looking at well-organized structure for different animals. Look at amoeba, for example, which uses the first one. The habitat is aquatic, and then it uses the respiratory structure is body surface, that this is the direct. When you look at earthworm is a semi-aquatic habitat. Okay, their skin is always moist, and they diffuse or they breathe or they carry the respiration through their moist skin. We are going to learn that in this class as well. Then we look at insects, okay, which are mostly terrestrial. They use what we call the tracheal system. And then we look at fish of tadpoles, which are aquatic. They make use of what? The gills. The amphibians, they are special organisms that live in both aquatic and what terrestrial habitat, and they breathe through their skin, and also have what we call external lungs, and then the buccal cavity skin. Look at the reptiles. Reptiles and mammals are terrestrial, and they breathe through their lungs. Okay, we're going to learn that in a subsequent class. Types of respiratory structure. The air or water which surrounds the organism from which the organism obtains oxygen is called the respiratory medium. Right, so the medium for which we obtain could be terrestrial medium, could be aquatic medium, could be semi-aquatic medium. Just that environment within the oxygen body we call it the respiratory medium. Why the organ? For example, the gills, the tracheal system, okay, the skin. These organs which air is obtained is called the respiratory organs. Okay, when we talk of gaseous exchange, we mean the taking in of oxygen and the release of carbon dioxide or dioxide, and that is why we say respiration is the same thing as a gaseous exchange. So the surface, such as the surface of the lungs or the gills, where gaseous exchange takes place, is called the respiratory surface. So these are three important terms you should know concerning this topic: the medium, the organ, and then the surface. You must understand that a respiratory surface needs to meet certain criteria. So I will call that the characteristics of a respiratory surface. The respiratory surface must be a large surface area. This will help to improve the rate of exchange of gases. When the surface area is large enough, then there will be improvement, or there will be good intake of or exchange of gases. All right. Now the respiratory surface area will help to shorten the diffusion distance. Okay, the surface area, if the surface area, because is well exposed to the region of the oxygen, it will shorten the distance of the diffusion, and then a relatively slow or so a thin surface will increase in diffusion rate. All right, when the surface is, how do I explain it now, is like closer to the oxygen, then we experience a good diffusion rate. All right, most surfaces that enables the exchange will dissolve before entering the blood or body fluid. Right, if the surface is moist, that is not too wet, it's not too dry, it will attract the oxygen. Right, not only that, it will also help to dissolve it before it diffuses into the bloodstream, as in we see, or as we talk about the earthworm. Okay, then we'll talk of permeability. You already know what that means. Okay, the ability to allow the penetration of these molecules. Now the respiratory surface must be permeable. If it is permeable, oxygen and carbon dioxide can enter and then diffuse in and out of the cell respectively. Okay, and it must be well ventilated surface. If the respiratory surface are well ventilated, then the supply of oxygen to the surface and then carbon dioxide from the surface will be very, very efficient. And finally, if the system or the transport system are efficient enough, then there will be active movement or transport of these gases in and out of the cell, thereby creating good functionality of the process and sustaining the life of the organisms. Look at amoeba. Amoeba respire through body surface. Gas exchange through the body surface is carried out by aquatic microscopic organisms using cell membrane. Some multicellular organisms, such as the earthworm, frogs, and toads, carry out gaseous exchange through the skin. But in the case of this very amoeba, it diffuses through the cell. Microscopic aquatic organisms such as the amoeba and paramecium have no specialized organs for respiration. Oxygen intake and carbon dioxide expulsion is by diffusion through the entire cell membrane. The dissolved oxygen in the water is of higher concentration than in the cell, as we discussed earlier, and then this will result to diffusion of oxygen into the cell of the amoeba. You must note here that insect respiratory system is not the same as the respiratory system in humans, like we have said earlier. Animals like birds, lions, cow, elephants, snakes, including human, have lungs as their primary respiratory organ. Why? In these animals, lungs perform the function of what? Exchanging air with the aid of nostrils, nasal cavity, and of course your windpipe. But in the case of insects and worms, they do not have lungs to perform their respiratory function. Therefore, breathing in insects and worms occur in a different system of respiratory organs, which we are going to look briefly. Now, look at the earthworm. How does the earthworm respire? Have you ever touched an earthworm before? When you touch an earthworm, their skin are usually moist. They feel moist, alright? Not too wet, not too dry. Why? This is why they are called slimy creatures. The reason behind their moist skin.
The reason behind their moist skin is that earthworm breathing organs, which is their skin, air can easily pass through the skin of an earthworm. The exchange of these gases usually takes place through its moist skin and capillaries. In these regions, the oxygen gas is picked up by the hemoglobin, dissolved in the blood, and carbon dioxide is released out. Earthworms can also use their skin not just for breathing alone, but also to move water and then salt by active transport. It is very important here to note that frogs can also use their skin to breathe, although frogs have a pair of lungs, which causes external, which they use to perform respiration. They often breathe through their skin too. So we'll look at frog in a subsequent class. Look at respiration in the earthworm. Look at the diagram very well. You can see the oxygen diffusing in and the carbon dioxide diffusing out of the system. In a more physiological approach, you see, let me zoom for you. See the moist skin in which the oxygen dissolves, and then you see the blood capillaries, and then you also see the dorsal blood vessels where oxygen diffuses through the moist skin to the blood. And if you look downward, you see the ventral blood vessel, and then you see the region where carbon dioxide diffuses through the moist skin to the outside environment. And then you have the heart as well. It's called the pseudo heart. So this gives you the complete structure and the respiratory process of the earthworm. Let's now look at that of the grasshopper. Grasshopper, is classified as a insecta, which of course is an insect. Insects and some other invertebrates exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide between their tissues and the air by a system of air-filled tubes called tracheal system. Alright, so that is the name for it. The tracheal system is made up of spiracles, tracheae, and then you have your tracheoles as well. Now the spiracles have valves which only open when the need for oxygen arises. In most insects, such as the grasshopper and cockroach, there are 10 pairs of spiracles, which are the openings, and they are located on the 8th abdomen segment, and 2 thoracic, which is located in the second and the third part of the segment of the insect, with each segment having 2 spiracles each. Take a look at these labelings. You see the tracheae, the air sacs, and then the tracheoles, and finally the spiracles. Now the spiracles are guided by 1. Valves, which are controlled by muscles that enables the grasshopper to open and close them. 2. Airs that filter out dust as the air enters into the system. This is another picture. You can see the trachea tubes, the air sacs, and then the spiracles as well. So what's the mechanism behind this? When oxygen is supplied by the surrounding atmosphere, the abdomen and the thoracic expand and then they contract. Expansion is for one mechanism, while contraction is for the other mechanism. When they expand, it causes the abdomen to increase and thereby drawing air by diffusion into the body through the spiracles, tracheae, air sacs, and then the trachea. Now, when the atmospheric oxygen reaches the fluid of the trachea, it dissolves there. After dissolving, the dissolved oxygen then diffuses into the cell for cellular respiration. And then, when the thoracic segment and the abdomen contract, carbon dioxide and water vapor diffuses from the tissue to the trachea. Outside, in cockroach, the process is almost the same. It's still the trachea trunk, alright? It's still the trachea system, alright? So in cockroach, respiration takes place through a small openings on the inside of the body called the spiracles. When the air enters the respiratory system of the cockroach through these internal openings, spiracles act as muscular valves leading to the internal respiratory system. The respiratory organs of cockroach is known as the trachea. The trachea is a dense network array of air tubes in the internal system. This trachea balances the pressure within the system, and not only that, and then as the oxygenated air from the atmosphere enters into the cockroach body through the spiracles into the trachea tubes, it penetrates into different cells and tissues of the body, where the oxygen gas is utilized to release energy, as you know, of course. And similarly, the air rich in carbon dioxide, which is the product of the respiratory process, goes into the trachea and move out through the spiracles. So it's a one-way, the same process. Now, gaseous exchange in aquatic exit. In aquatic exit, they use the trachea system for gaseous exchange. Some, like mosquito wiggles, they get their air by poking a breathing tube connected to their trachea system through the water surface. Some insects that can submerge for long period carry a bubble of air with them from which they breathe. So that's what you can see there clearly. Even in aquatic insects that have gills, after oxygen diffuses from the water into the gills, it then diffuses through a gas-filled trachea system for transport through the body. So all insects uses a trachea system, even whether the presence of gills or not. That is what we are saying now. Let's now look at finally respiration in fishes or in fish. Alright, to perform their respiratory function, fish have specialized organs that help them inhale oxygen dissolved in water. Respiration in fish takes place with the help of the gills. Okay, that's the structure, the odd respiratory structure. Fish have 4 gills on each side of the head. Each gill have 2 rows of soft feathery structure, which we call the gill filament. Okay, it provides a large surface area for gas exchange. A large surface area is needed or is crucial for gas exchange in aquatic organisms, as water contains little amount of dissolved oxygen, and of course you know why, from the molecules of water. The filament in fish gills are arranged in rows in the gill arc. Each filament contains what we call a lamellin, which are discs supplied with capillaries. In bony fish such as tilapia or tilapia fish, the 4 gills on each side are covered with bony plate, which we call the opaque lump. Alright, So this is the structure we're talking about. You can see the gill here, then you see the water flow, and then you see the operculum. Look at the gill hatch, look at the blood vessels, look at the gill filament on the second diagram there. You must note here that within the inner side of the gill hatch, which is the part we've just talked about, there are tiny bony structures that we call the gill rakers, which are used for feeding. They are not for breathing, they are for feeding. Okay, and they also prevent food substances from entering the gill. So within the gill arc, you can see the gill rakers there. These gill rakers are very protective because they protect the gills and also they help in feeding. Typical gills are organized into a series of plates and may be internal as in crabs and fish, or external in the body as in some amphibians. We are talking about the gills now. We know we have external and external gills. Now water flows over gills in one direction while blood flows in the opposite direction through gill capillaries. This kind of flow or movement is what we call countercurrent flow. The countercurrent flow maximizes oxygen transfer. Countercurrent flow is an arrangement by which fish obtain oxygen from the water that flows through their gills. Water flows across the respiratory surface of the gill in one direction, while blood flows in the other direction through the blood vessels on the other side of the surface. Take a look at this diagram. You see the water flow moving through this mouth, passing through the gills, and then look at the operculum and then the gill arch under the opercular flap, which of course helps in the movement of the oxygen to the bloodstream. So internal gills in fish enable countercurrent flow. Right, you have the water flowing through one direction, and then you have where the water is flowing, you have the oxygenated blood, and then the other side where we call deoxygenated blood is flowing out. So you can see the countercurrent flow arrangement there. That is a gill filament. Here is a more clear description. You see the top, the oxygenated blood, and then you look at the top right, oxygenated blood, and then you look at where water is flowing through by my down right here, and then where blood is flowing through by my center left there. Okay, and then you have the red blood cell, of course, and the afferent vessels. So let's look at the tilapia fish. Typically, when the mouth of a tilapia fish is open, the floor of the mouth will be lowered, and as the floor is lowered, the opercula or the two opercula will close, and the water will be drawn into the mouth to occupy that depression created by the lowering of the floor of the mouth. And then when the mouth is closed, the floor of the mouth is raised, and at the same time the two opercula will open, and the water contains dissolved oxygen passes through the gills. So in a short term is this: mouth opens, opercula close, and causes a lower depression, and because of this lower depression, water will move in, and then when mouth close, opercula open, and it pushes this water to pass through the gills, where oxygen or dissolved oxygen is then absorbed by the capillaries and carried into the general blood circulation. The carbon dioxide produced during cellular respiration is carried by blood vessels to the gills, where it diffuses into the water. So look at the big diagram of the system. Oxygenated water drawn in through the mouth, and then you see the operculum. What will happen to the operculum? And then you see deoxygenated water flows out through the operculum. Now let's look at the process. Now when the mouth is closed, the floor of the mouth is raised, and then the two opercula will be opened, and then deoxygenated water flows out through the opercula. Now next class we'll be talking about external gills for amphibians, and then the lungs for terrestrial animals and human as well. Until then, stay safe, attempt the quiz, and ensure you do the assignment correctly and upload. Take care.